three friends were traveling, and night had already fallen. The moon was hiding behind clouds, the air was damp, and all that could be heard was the soft, distant murmur of the river. They decided to spend the night near the river, because they had to continue their journey early in the morning. The river flowed right beside an old graveyard, where ancient stone graves rested, some half sunken into the earth. Whenever the wind passed through those graves, it created a strange dragging sound, echoing in the quiet night. They all had heard rumors about this place. People said strange sounds came from the river at night, but they laughed it off, saying these were just stories told to scare travelers. They set up their camp, gathered wood, and lit a fire, its warmth glowing weakly in the dark. The river shimmered faintly under the scattered moonlight. The air smelled of damp soil and burning wood. They ate their food and chatted for a while. The conversation was normal at first, but as the night deepened, their voices slowly faded. A quietness settled around them, broken only by the gentle sound of the flowing river. Then suddenly a faint sound came from the water, a soft, playful giggle, like a child laughing. All three lifted their heads at the same moment and stared toward the river. At first they thought it must be the wind playing tricks, but the laughter came again, this time clearer. One of them slowly raised the torch and pointed its light toward the water. The river's surface was gently rippling, and the moment the light hit it, they saw something there, a small floating shape, something the size of a child, its form drifting just on top of the water. But there was no face, no features, just a shadow-like figure shaped like a child but completely empty. Where the face should be, their breath froze, their bodies stiffened. The shadow drifted closer, as though being carried by an invisible current, weightless and silent. Even without a face, it felt like it was looking at them, smiling. As the laughter echoed once again, now louder, now unmistakable. One of them tried to speak, but no sound came out. They all just stared, unable to move, rooted by an unseen fear. The shadow slowly sank into the water, disappearing beneath the surface, but the laughter did not fade. Instead it grew sharper, clearer. The night air was cold, yet now a deeper, colder shiver ran through their bones, as if the river itself was breathing into them. The night grew darker, the fire burned low, and a sharp wind swept through the graveyard, rattling stones and earth. The laughter now sounded close to close, as if someone was sitting just beside their camp in the river, but no shape was visible anymore, only the sound of ripples like tiny hands running across the surface. Their hearts pounded, but not one of them stood up to leave. It felt like the darkness itself held them trapped in place. They tried to ignore it. They spoke about sleeping and ending the night, but their bodies refused to relax. The faint fire glowed on their faces, but every flicker of light seemed too weak to chase away the sound. The breeze no longer felt like air, it felt like someone was breathing near their ears, slow, heavy, chilling. They all sat silently, their fear shared but unspoken. Dawn began to rise at the edge of the horizon, soft light slowly spreading across the river. As soon as the first morning glow touched the water, the laughter stopped immediately, as if someone had shut it away. The silence felt sudden, heavy but freeing. They all looked at one another, and it seemed like a weight lifted from their chests. Their faces, however, were pale, their eyes tired, marked by the night they had survived. They looked toward the river once more. The water was now calm, ordinary, harmless, the surface reflecting morning light like nothing had ever happened. But they all knew the truth. The memory of that faceless shadow floating toward them was carved deeply into their minds. They packed their belongings quietly. No one said a word, and began to walk away from the river and the old graveyard. But as they walked, they could not help turning back again and again, and every time it felt like something unseen was still watching them from the water. Something small, something smiling, something waiting. During the rest of their journey, none of them spoke about the night, but the sound remained inside them. The rippling water brought a whisper, the passing breeze carried a soft echo, and whenever silence surrounded them, they heard it again. That tiny, gentle laugh, now no longer just a memory, but a shadow that walked with them forever. Days passed, and the three continued their journey, but something had changed inside them. The world around them looked the same, yet everything felt heavier, quieter, like something unseen was walking just a step behind them. They did not speak of the river, but each one of them carried the same silence, the same echo, the same memory. The laughter was no longer a sound in the air, it was now inside their thoughts, rising whenever the world became still. At night, when they tried to sleep, each felt as if someone very small was sitting near them, not touching, not moving, just watching. Whenever they closed their eyes, they saw the water. They saw the shadow floating slowly toward them, without a face, yet filled with expression, the kind of expression that could not be seen, only felt soft, playful, familiar, and deeply raw. One evening they reached a small village and decided to rest there, hoping that people, the noise, warmth, food, and light would help them forget the river. The villagers were kind, but when they learned where the travelers had camped, their smiles faded, the atmosphere shifted slightly, and they lowered their voices as if afraid that something might hear. One of the elders of the village came forward, old eyes tired yet sharp, and asked softly if they had heard anything by the river. The travelers did not answer, but the elder saw the fear in their silence. His voice remained calm, but the air around him grew heavy as he spoke. He said that long ago a child from the village had gone to the river to play and had drowned near the old graveyard. The river had never returned the child's body, and from that time, some nights, the river carried the child's laughter back to its shore. The elder said the laughter was not meant to scare, but to reach something, to call someone, to bring company, because the child had been alone for too long. The travelers listened in stillness, their hearts frozen. The elder warned them that once the laughter follows someone, it does not leave easily, it chooses, and once chosen, the sound does not fade by distance or time. It stays and listens and waits. That night, even in the warmth of the village home, with doors locked and lamps lit, the laughter came again. Not loud, not threatening, just soft, like a whisper of water running over small stones, gentle and close, as if someone very small was sitting right beside them, smiling with no shape, no face, only presence. Sleep refused to come, and they understood something now far more frightening than the river itself. The child, the shadow, the laughter had not been in the water, it had been waiting in loneliness, and now it had found them, and now it would follow for the rest of their lives. Whenever night came and the world quieted, they would hear it again, that tiny, gentle laugh traveling through silence like ripples across still water, and they knew it would never leave them anymore, just like a shadow, just like reflection in water, just like a memory that breathes. Time continued to move, but for them it no longer felt natural. Days blended into nights, nights into more nights, and every quiet moment was filled with that same soft laughter. It never screamed, never rushed, never showed anger. It simply remained, always close enough to be heard, never close enough to be seen, and that was somehow far more terrifying. They tried to distance themselves from one another, thinking maybe the laughter followed only as long as they stayed together. But when they separated, they realized the truth. It was not the place, it was not the river, it was not even the memory. Each of them carried the presence itself inside them, like a small voice inside the chest, a small breath behind the ear, a small cold hand resting lightly on the back of the neck. One of them tried to drown the sound with music and noise, but whenever silence returned, the laughter slid back, and soft and patient one tried to pray, but the laughter did not fight, it did not resist, it simply waited, because it did not need to overpower anything. It had already settled inside, and one tried to forget completely, forcing the mind to ignore the memory, but forgetting only made the laughter closer, louder, clearer, like something leaning slowly toward their ear. Years passed, and they traveled far from the old river, far from the village, far from everything that reminded them of that night, but the presence remained gentle and persistent, like a small child walking behind them, holding an invisible thread. Sometimes they would wake in the middle of the night because they felt water cold, water around their feet, even though they were nowhere near any river. Sometimes they would see faint ripples on the floor, even though there was no water in sight. Sometimes in the reflection of a window, in the reflection of polished metal in the reflection of the eye of another person. They would see a shape small and featureless, floating just behind them, not threatening, not attacking, just watching with a silent smile that could not be seen but could be felt. They learned to move through the world. With it they learned to live while being watched, gently, softly, constantly, but the laughter never faded. Not once it became a companion, a shadow, a second presence living within their days and breathing into their nights. And sometimes when they passed near water, even small water, a puddle, a well, a fountain, they would pause, because in that moment the laughter always grew clearer and they could feel something just below the surface waiting patiently, as though the river had never let go, not of them, not of the child, not of the laughter. And deep down they understood something they had never said aloud. The presence did not follow them because it wanted to harm, it followed because it knew. They had seen it, heard it, felt it. Once someone hears that laughter, truly hears it, the river never forgets them and the shadow never lets them be alone again. Years turned into longer years and the presence never left it, did not grow weaker in it, did not grow stronger. It simply stayed, like a breath that did not belong to them, like a memory that would not fade. The laughter had become a part of their silence, a part of their sleep, a part of their waking thoughts. It lived behind every moment, like a shadow, too light to be seen, too real to be denied. One evening near the end of their long wandering, they found themselves again near water, not the same river, not the same land, but a different flowing stream, wide and quiet. The sky above it was soft with evening colors, and the air was calm. For the first time in years they did not feel fear, they felt something else, something tired, something accepting. The laughter came again, but this time it did not echo inside their heads. It came from the water itself, soft, gentle, the same sound they had heard on the first night by the graveyard. But now the sound was clearer, full of longing, almost sad. They stepped closer to the water, not because they were called, but because they wanted to understand. The presence had followed for so long, and now it felt as if the moment to face it had finally arrived. The water rippled slowly, and from beneath it the same small shadow rose, just like before, floating just at the surface, still without a face, still shaped like a child. But this time it did not move toward them. The shadow simply stayed watching, waiting. The laughter softened, then faded. Instead of fear, a deep stillness settled over them, like the world itself was holding breath. They knelt by the river, and the shadow seemed to lift its head. Although there were no features to see, they felt an expression, not playful, not haunting, just lonely. The kind of loneliness that has no end, the kind that waits for someone to notice, someone to remember, someone to stay. They understood at last. The shadow had never wanted to frighten, it had never wanted to harm, it had only wanted not to be alone. They placed their hands in the water, and the river felt warm, as though it recognized them, as though it had been waiting a long time. The shadow moved closer, slowly, gently, not reaching, not pulling, just existing beside them. The laughter did not return. Instead, there was a silence that felt full, like something had finally found rest. The shadow sank back into the water, but this time it did not disappear. It simply settled into the river, as if it had returned home. The water stilled, the air grew soft, the world grew quiet, and for the first time in years the companions felt the presence fade, not completely but peacefully, not like a haunting ending but like a story closing. They rose from the riverbank and walked away. The silence that followed was different, not heavy, not watching, just quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs to those who have given something back and received something understood. And though the memory remained, it no longer echoed inside their minds. The laughter no longer followed, it had found the place it belonged, and they had finally been allowed to leave. The river remained behind them, flowing gently beneath the evening sky, and somewhere within its depths a small presence rested, no longer searching, no longer calling, simply at peace, waiting only for the water and the light to move together forever, without loneliness anymore.